In a peaceful village called Nanka, there lived a man named Mazibe. Mazibe was a catechist in the village Catholic church. Being a catechist made him feel special and important. He believed that he was holier and more privileged than anyone else in the village. Wherever he went, he walked with his shoulders high, looking down on everyone around him. He thought no one was as good as he was. Mazibe was married to a beautiful woman named Akudo. Akudo was just like her husband. She was proud and always acted like she was better than everyone else. They were a perfect match in their prideful ways. Together, they had two beautiful daughters, Ezine and Angela. Even though Mazibe and Akudo were full of pride, their daughters were the complete opposite. Ezine and Angela were humble, kind, and down to earth. They treated everyone with respect and carried everyone along. No matter who they were well loved in the village for their gentle and caring nature. Both Ezine and Angela were bright students. They attended one of the best Catholic schools in the area, and they were there on scholarship. Their father's position in the church helped them get the scholarship, but it was their hard work and intelligence that made them excel in their studies. Angela, being the eldest, was very focused and determined. After she finished her secondary education, she decided she wanted to study medicine. When she shared her plans with her parents, they were overjoyed. The thought of being called Papa and Mama Doctor filled them with pride. They couldn't wait to tell everyone in the village that their daughter was going to be a medical doctor. Ezine, on the other hand, had different plans. She wanted to study law and become a lawyer. She was passionate about justice and wanted to help people by fighting for their rights. But when she told her parents about her decision, they were not pleased. Mazibe and Akudo believed that lawyers were liars, and they didn't want their daughter to be associated with such a profession. "No, our child will never be a liar," they declared. Ezine tried her best to explain to them that being a lawyer was not about lying, but about helping people and ensuring that justice was served. But her parents wouldn't listen. They were set in their ways and couldn't see past their own beliefs. "If you don't know what to study, then we want you to be a reverend sister," they told her. They thought that becoming a reverend sister was the holiest and most respectful thing a young woman could do. They wanted Ezine to serve God in the convent, thinking it would add to their already inflated sense of pride. Ezine was heartbroken. She had always dreamed of becoming a lawyer, and now her own parents were standing in the way of that dream. She didn't know what to do or how to make them understand her passion for law. Mazibe and his wife Akudo were firm in their decision. They had made up their minds that their younger daughter Ezine would become a reverend sister. They believed that this would bring them great honor and respect in the church. Mazibe was already proud of his position as a catechist, and the thought of having a daughter who was a reverend sister made him feel even more important. Akudo agreed, thinking about how people would admire them and talk about their family with great respect. "Imagine how people will look at us," Mazibe said with a satisfied smile. "We will be even more respected in the community. Papa and Mama Doctor on one side, and on the other side, parents of a reverend sister. No one will dare to question our holiness." Akudo nodded, feeling just as pleased. "It will surely boost our status in the church," she agreed. But Ezine wasn't having it. All her life, she had always wanted to be a lawyer. She hated seeing people being oppressed, and she was determined to bring justice to those who were suffering. Ezine was passionate about fighting for what was right, and she knew that being a lawyer was the best way for her to do that. "No, Papa, I don't want to be a reverend sister," Ezine said firmly. "I want to study law and become a lawyer." But her parents wouldn't listen. "We have already decided," Mazibe said. "You will go to the convent and become a reverend sister. It's a noble path and it will bring great honor to our family." Ezine felt a knot in her stomach. She couldn't bear the thought of giving up her dream. But there was another reason why she didn't want to become a reverend sister. Something she hadn't told her parents. Ezine had a secret. She was in love with a young man named Okechukwu. They had met some time ago when her school went to participate in a quiz competition. Okechukwu was one of the coordinators at the event. He was in his late 20s, tall, and had a kind and gentle manner that Ezine found very appealing. Ezine's performance during the quiz had been outstanding. She had answered every question with confidence, and her brilliance had caught Okechukwu's attention. After the event, he approached her and praised her for her intelligence. They started talking, and before long, they became friends. Their friendship quickly blossomed into something more, and they began dating as soon as Ezine was done with her secondary education. Ezine loved Okechukwu very much. He was everything she had ever wanted in a man: caring, supportive, and understanding. They had dreams of building a future together. The thought of going to convent meant she would have to give up Okechukwu, and that was something she wasn't ready to do. Ezine knew that if she became a reverend sister, she would never see Okechukwu again. She would have to leave him behind, and the thought of that broke her heart. She loved him too much to let him go. But at the same time, she didn't know how to convince her parents to let her follow her own path. As Ezine sat quietly in her room, her mind raced with thoughts of what to do. She didn't want to disappoint her parents, but she couldn't give up on her dreams or on the man she loved. She felt trapped, with no clear way out. The pressure from her parents became too much to bear. Her parents, Mazibe and Akudo, were relentless. Day after day, they kept pressurizing her, insisting that she must go to the convent and become a reverend sister. They threatened her, saying that if she didn't follow their wishes, she would bring shame upon the family. Ezine felt like she was suffocating under the weight of their expectations. Even her elder sister, Angela, noticed how much Ezine was struggling. One day, Angela decided to step in and talk to their parents. "Papa, Mama," Angela began cautiously, "maybe we should let Ezine choose her own path. She has always wanted to be a lawyer." But before Angela could say more, Mazibe caught her up sharply. "What nonsense are you saying? If you don't want to follow your own path, we can also send you to the convent," he threatened. Akudo joined in, glaring at Angela. "Yes, we will make you a reverend sister too, if you keep talking like that," she warned. Angela was taken aback. She had no intention of jeopardizing her own future. She was already focused on her studies, preparing for her admission into the medical school. Realizing that there was nothing more she could do without risking her own dreams, Angela remained silent from that day forward, focusing solely on her admission process. Ezine, on the other hand, was completely frustrated. The pressure from her parents was overwhelming, and she felt like she had no one to turn to. Finally, she decided to confide in her lover Okechukwu about everything that was happening. When they met, Ezine poured out her heart to him, telling him about the constant pressure and threat from her parents. Okechukwu listened carefully, his face showing how much he was pained by her situation. "I'm so sorry you are going through this, Ezine," Okechukwu said softly, "but you must not disrespect your parents. We can always find a way around this." Okechukwu tried to comfort her, speaking to her about many things. He told her to be patient and assured her that they would figure out a solution together. They also talked about their future, sharing their dreams of building a life together. Okechukwu's words lifted Ezine's spirit, and for the first time in days, she felt a sense of peace. After spending a long time together, Ezine finally announced that it was time for her to go home. Okechukwu walked her to the door and saw her off, holding her hand gently as they said their goodbyes. When Ezine got home that evening, she made a decision. She was tired of fighting and felt like she had no other choice. So she went to her parents and told them what they had been longing to hear. Papa, Mama, I have decided to go to the convent, Ezine said quietly. Mazibe and Okudo were overjoyed. They hugged their daughter tightly, thrilled that she had finally agreed to follow their wishes. We are so proud of you, my daughter, Mazibe said, beaming with pride. We will provide you with whatever you need. Akudo nodded eagerly. Yes, we will make sure you have everything. You will make us so proud, she added. Without wasting any time, they picked up the form for her and started the process immediately. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. They finally secured her place in the convent, and all through the period of preparation, Mazibe and his wife carried themselves with even more pride than before. They told everyone who would listen that their daughter was going to the convent to become a reverend sister. But what Mazibe and Akudo didn't know was that Ezine had other plans. Ezine finally arrived at the convent. The moment she stepped inside, everything felt strange to her. The convent was quiet and orderly, with everyone moving about with a sense of purpose and devotion. The nuns were kind, but there was a strict routine to follow. Prayers, meditations, and the silence at certain times of the day. Ezine tried her best to blend in with everything that was happening, but it wasn't easy. Her mind was far from the daily activities of the convent. While the other girls seemed to embrace their new lives, Ezine found herself pretending. She went through the motions, following the routines and participating in the prayers, but her heart wasn't in it. She kept thinking about her dreams of becoming a lawyer, and more importantly about Okechukwu. Meanwhile, Okechukwu had some news. He had recently gotten a job around Onitsha, which was not too far from the convent. He was excited about the job, but more than that, he was eager to find a way to see Ezine. After planning, he figured out a way and managed to send her the details of his new address. One day, when the convent had a free day, Ezine decided to take a bold step. She sneaked out of the convent and headed straight to the bus stop. Following the address Okechukwu had given her, she boarded a bus to Onitsha. The journey was filled with anticipation as she couldn't wait to see Okechukwu again. When she arrived in Onitsha, Okechukwu was waiting for her. The moment they saw each other, their faces lit up with joy. Okechukwu was so happy to see her, and Ezine felt a rush of relief and excitement. They spent time together, holding each other close, creating sweet memories, and reassuring themselves of their unending love. The 2 days they spent together were filled with laughter and happiness as they dreamed about their future together. But all good things had to come to an end, and soon it was time for Ezine to return to the convent. She left Onitsha with a heavy heart, but she knew she had to pretend like nothing had happened. When she got back to the convent, she slipped back into her routine, acting as if everything was normal. No one suspected a thing. This continued each time the convent had a break. Ezine would sneak out to Onitsha to be with her boyfriend Okechukwu. They cherished these moments together, knowing how precious they were. However, Mazibe started to get curious. He had sent Ezine a message asking why she didn't come home during the holidays like the other girls did. He wondered why she chose to stay at the convent instead of spending time with her family. Ezine, always quick on her feet, came up with excuses. She told her father that she stayed back because she wanted to have private time with God when the convent was quiet. She added that she didn't want to be equally yoked with unbelievers, hinting that she wanted to avoid distractions and focus on her spiritual growth. Her parents believed her without question. They were proud of their daughter, thinking she was deeply devoted to her calling. In reality, while her parents were happy and proud, Ezine was in Onitsha, catching fun with her boyfriend Okechukwu. Mazibe and his wife Akudo continued to bask in their pride. They couldn't stop talking about how their daughter Ezine was in the convent, preparing to become a reverend sister. To them, it was the greatest achievement, and they made sure everyone in the village knew about it. Whenever they walked through the village, Mazibe would puff out his chest, his head held high like a proud peacock. Akudo would walk beside him, smiling with satisfaction. They greeted everyone they met, often bringing up Ezine in the conversation. Our daughter is in the convent, you know, Mazibe would say. She's on her way to becoming a reverend sister. We are so blessed. Some villagers would smile politely and nod their heads, but as soon as Mazibe and Akudo were out of sight, they would start laughing and mocking them. They were getting tired of the constant bragging. Can't they talk about something else for a change? One villager would whisper to another. It's always about their daughter in the convent, another would reply, rolling their eyes. Still, there were a few who were genuinely jealous of the Ibes. They wished they had a daughter who was becoming a reverend sister, and they couldn't help but admire the couple's confidence. But the Ibes were blissfully unaware of what people really thought. They continued to walk around with pride, completely unaware that their daughter was far from the perfect image they had created in her minds. Little did they know that Ezine was close to shattering their hopes. Meanwhile, Ezine's secret affair with Okechukwu continued. At first, she would only sneak out to see him during the holidays. But as time went on, she became bolder. There were times when she couldn't wait until the holidays, so she would find a way to sneak out even during regular days. At first, her absence went unnoticed, but after a while, the nuns started to see a pattern. Ezine would be gone for hours, and no one would know where she had gone. The other girls in the convent began to whisper among themselves, wondering what Ezine was up to. The nuns also became concerned. One day, when Ezine had been gone for an unusually long time, she was called in for questioning. Where were you, Ezine? One of the nuns asked gently. We noticed you were missing. Ezine, always quick with her words, had an answer ready. I was in the chapel, sister, she said. I needed some time alone with God. I'm sorry I worried anyone. The nun looked at Ezine closely, trying to see if there was more to the story. Ezine kept her face calm and innocent, and although the nun wasn't completely convinced, she didn't push further. Very well, the nun finally said, but please let someone know next time. We care about your safety. Yes, sister, I will, Ezine replied, smiling softly. But this encounter made Ezine realize that she needed to be more careful. The nuns were starting to notice her absences, and she knew she couldn't afford to get caught. From that day on, she became more cautious about when and how she sneaked out to see Okechukwu. Ezine continued with her sneaky games. She wasn't really learning anything from the convent or trying to become a reverend sister. She was just there to complete the numbers, going through the motions while her mind was elsewhere. 2 years had passed, and nothing changed. Ezine kept up with her routine and sneaking out of the convent. Sometimes, she would disappear suddenly, rushing to Onitsha to see Okechukwu. Other times, Okechukwu would come around the convent and they would find a place to hang out together, sharing intimate moments. Everything seemed to be going fine until one day, Ezine noticed something strange. For 2 months, she hadn't had her monthly flow. At first, she didn't think much of it. But as time went on, she began to worry. She didn't know what could be causing it, and fear started to creep into her heart. Ezine couldn't keep to herself any longer. She ran to Okechukwu and told him what was happening. Okechukwu listened carefully, and seeing how scared she was, he took her to a clinic to find out what was wrong. At the clinic, the doctor examined Ezine and then gave them the news. You are pregnant, the doctor said calmly. Ezine couldn't believe what she was hearing. She screamed, putting her 2 hands on her head. Her heart raced as she tried to process the information. Okechukwu too was afraid. They had been so careful to keep their relationship a secret. But now, it seemed everything was about to come crashing down. What are we going to do? Ezine asked, her voice shaking. Okechukwu didn't have an answer. He was just as frightened as she was. He knew they couldn't think about terminating the pregnancy because Ezine was a novice when it comes to such things. He didn't want to put her through any more stress. Ezine returned to the convent, but she was a different person. She was confused and scared, and it showed. She became a shadow of herself, no longer about to pretend that everything was fine. Her mind kept going back to her parents. What would they say? What would they do when they found out she was pregnant? The days went by, and soon the nuns started noticing some changes in Ezine. She was quieter than usual, and her usual energy seemed to have drained away. The nuns began to observe her more closely, and after some time, they decided to talk to her. Ezine was invited to a meeting with the nuns. They questioned her gently, trying to understand what was going on. Ezine hesitated at first, but eventually, she couldn't hide the truth any longer. She confirmed that she was pregnant. The nuns were shocked by the news. They realized that Ezine could no longer stay in the convent. It was against the rules for a pregnant woman to remain there, and they knew she had to go home. Two of the nuns were assigned to take her home. Ezine was terrified. She didn't know how her parents would react, and the thought of facing them made her feel even more anxious. The day the nuns arrived at the Ibe's residence was a day Mazi Ibe and his wife Akudo would never forget. It was early in the morning, and the sun was just beginning to rise. Mazi Ibe was outside, busy sweeping the compound as he did every morning, when he noticed two nuns approaching with Ezine walking quietly beside them. Mazi Ibe's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't expecting any visitors, especially not nuns from the convent. He was surprised, but he quickly put on a smile, thinking perhaps it was just a friendly visit. "Good morning, sisters." Mazi Ibe greeted them warmly, trying to hide the unease that was creeping into his chest. The nuns nodded, returned the greeting. "Good morning, Mazi Ibe." Akudo was standing at the doorway, noticed something was off. She saw the serious expressions on the nuns' faces and the way Ezine kept her head down, not meeting anyone's gaze. She used her eyes to ask Ezine what was wrong, but Ezine remained silent, not daring to look up. The nuns didn't waste time. They went straight to the point. "We've come to inform you that your daughter Ezine can no longer stay in the convent." Mazi Ibe was taken aback. "What do you mean, sisters?" he asked, his voice shaky. The nuns explained everything that had happened, how Ezine had been acting strangely, the changes they noticed, and how they eventually discovered she was pregnant. As they spoke, Mazi Ibe felt his world crumbling around him. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. His face fell, and he lowered his head in shame. The proud, confident man was gone, replaced by a father who felt utterly disgraced. Akudo, on the other hand, was so shocked that she carried her hands to her head. Her mouth was wide open. She stood frozen, unable to speak as the nuns continued explaining the situation. They were highly shocked to their teeth that Ezine, the daughter they had such hopes for, had brought such disgrace upon them. The nuns, sensing the heaviness in the air, offered a few words of comfort and encouragement before leaving. They reminded Mazi Ibe and Akudo that God's love was still with them and that they should try to be strong during this difficult time. Once the nuns left, Mazi Ibe and Akudo turned to Ezine, who was still standing quietly, her head bowed. "Who is responsible for this?" Mazi Ibe asked, his voice trembling with anger and hurt. But Ezine said nothing. She just stood there, not willing to reveal the truth. "Answer your father," Akudo shouted, her voice full of pain. But still, Ezine remained silent. Her parents were furious. They couldn't believe that their daughter, who had always been so obedient and respectful, could do something like this and then refuse to explain herself. They began to hurl harsh words at her, comparing her to Angela, who was excelling in her studies and making them proud. "Look at your sister Angela," Akudo cried. "She's in school, working hard to become a doctor. Why you? You have brought shame to this family." They couldn't contain their disappointment and anger. They decided that Ezine needed to be punished for what she had done. From that day on, they treated her harshly, hoping to make her realize the gravity of her actions. They would starve her, giving her only small portions of food, not enough to satisfy her hunger. They assigned her the most tedious and exhausting chores around the house, making her scrub floors, wash clothes, and fetch water under the scorching sun, even though she was pregnant. Ezine saw her in the hands of her parents. She barely had enough food to eat, and she was always tired and weak. She felt isolated and alone, with no one to talk to. Her parents had given her stern warnings not to show herself in the village, afraid that their shame would spread even further. So Ezine spent her days in silence, living in her own world, cut off from everything and everyone. Ezine's life became a daily struggle. Her days were filled with chores and her nights were spent in solitude. She had become a shadow of herself, shyly hidden from the world, avoiding anyone who might come to the house. Her father Mazibe and her mother Akudo continued to make life hard for her, treating her more like a servant than their daughter. They couldn't forgive her for what they saw as a disgrace to their family. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Ezine's belly grew, and the time for her to give birth drew closer. She was filled with fear, not knowing what to expect. She had never been through anything like this before, and with the way her parents treated her, she was scared of what would happen when her time came. Every day, she silently prayed, asking God to help her through the difficult days ahead. Finally, the day arrived. Ezine went into labor early in the morning. Her parents, not wanting the news to spread, quickly called a midwife to come and attend to her at home. They were determined to keep everything quiet, not wanting the villagers to know what was happening in their house. Ezine struggled through the pain, praying silently in her heart. After many hours, she finally gave birth to a baby boy. She was so relieved when she heard the baby's cry. Knowing that she had made it through safely, the midwife cleaned the baby and handed him to Ezine, who held him close, feeling a mix of emotions, relief, joy, and fear all at once. But even with the arrival of the baby, her parents' attitude didn't change. They barely looked at the child and continued to treat Ezine with the same coldness as before. There was no celebration, no joy in the house. Ezine continued to live in dread, always watching her parents, afraid of what they might do next. Meanwhile, Okechukwu had been trying to figure out how to find Ezine. It had been months since they last saw each other, and he was filled with guilt. He had given her space, afraid of what her parents might do if they found out he was responsible for her pregnancy. But now, he couldn't bear the guilt any longer. He knew he had to find Ezine to make things right. Ezine, on the other hand, was surprised that Okechukwu hadn't come looking for her. She missed him and wished she could go to him, but her parents' strict instructions kept her bound at home. She was stuck, feeling abandoned and alone, unsure of what the future held for her and her baby. But Okechukwu was determined. He decided to go to the village and find out what had happened to Ezine. He trailed her to their village, asking around discreetly, not wanting to draw too much attention. Finally, he sent someone ahead to Mazibe's compound to find out what was going on. That's how Okechukwu learned about the baby and everything Ezine had been through because of him. He was shocked and deeply saddened to hear about the suffering she had endured. The guilt weighed heavily on him, knowing that the seeds he had planted in Ezine's life had led to so much pain and hardship. As Okechukwu stood outside the compound, hidden from view, he made a decision. He couldn't leave Ezine to suffer alone any longer. He knew he had to do something to make things right, no matter the consequences. Ezine had no idea that her lover Okechukwu had discovered the truth about her suffering. Each day, she continued to live in sorrow, praying silently and hoping that something good would happen to her and her baby. She wished for a miracle, something that would take her away from the misery she was living in, but each day seemed to bring only more pain. 2 weeks had passed since Okechukwu learned about his child and the hardships Ezine was enduring. Determined to make things right, he decided to take the next step. He approached his parents and explained everything, asking for their support. They agreed to go with him to Nanka to meet Ezine's family and do the honorable thing. On the day they arrived, Akudo was at home with Ezine and her baby. The sun was high in the sky and everything seemed as usual. Akudo was inside tending to some household chores when she heard voices outside the compound. She came out, a bit puzzled to see who their visitors were. When she saw a group of strangers approaching, she felt a bit uneasy, wondering if they had lost their way. As they drew closer, Akudo greeted them politely, still unsure of their identity. After exchanging pleasantries, the visitors introduced themselves. Akudo's heart skipped a beat as her face turned serious. She quickly realized that these were not lost travelers, but people with a purpose. She called out to Ezine, asking her to come and see if she knew the visitors. Ezine stepped out, her heart racing with curiosity and a bit of fear when she saw Okechukwu standing there with his parents. Her eyes widened in surprise. She confirmed to her mother that Okechukwu was indeed the father of her child. Akudo, still a bit shaken, offered them a seat and told them she would fetch Mazibe, her husband. Mazibe was not far. He was in a nearby farm tending to the crops when Akudo reached him and told him about the visitors. His expressions darkened. He hurriedly left the farm, his heart filled with anger and bitterness. He couldn't believe that Okechukwu had the nerves to show up after everything that had happened. When Mazibe arrived at the house and saw Okechukwu and his parents, he couldn't hold back his anger. He vented his frustration, raising his voice at Okechukwu, demanding to know why he had brought such disgrace to his family. But Okechukwu's parents quickly intervened, pleading with Mazibe to have mercy on their son. They assured him that they had come with good intention and were ready to do the right thing. Mazibe, though still angry, began to calm down as he listened to their pleas. He could see the sincerity in their eyes, and slowly his heart softened. The conversation turned from anger to understanding, and soon they were discussing the next steps. The meeting ended on a positive note, with Okechukwu's family taking the lead for the marriage rites and agreeing on a date for the ceremony. There was a sense of relief in the air, a feeling that finally things were going to be set right. True to their word, Okechukwu's family fulfilled all the requirements, and in no time, Ezine and Okechukwu were officially married. The news spread quickly through the village, and soon everyone knew about Ezine's baby. But this time, there was no shame or fear in her heart. She was filled with great joy and delight as she left her parents' house and joined her husband in his home. For the first time in a long while, Ezine felt free. She had finally escaped the prison she had been living in, and her heart was filled with hope for the future. She was no longer the frightened girl hiding away from the world. She was a wife and a mother, ready to build a new life with Okechukwu by her side. Ezine and Okechukwu were finally happy to be together again, and this time, they were not just two, but three, a small loving family. Their lives were slowly returning to normal, and there was no more need to sneak around just to be with one another. The day of hiding and secret meeting were behind them, and they could now openly express their love without fear. The bond between them, which had been tested by time and trials, did not weaken. Instead, it blossomed even more. Okechukwu loved their son dearly and named him Sochima, which means only God knows. From the moment they returned from their marriage, Okechukwu was completely devoted to him. He never ceased to dote on him, spending every possible moment playing with him, feeding him, and even singing lullabies to him at night. The joy of fatherhood filled his heart, and he often thanked God for the blessings of their child and the happiness that now filled their home. But Ezine's dreams had not faded. Even with the new responsibilities of being a wife and mother, she remembered the dream she had cherished since she was a young girl. The dream of studying law. It was a passion she had held on to, even when her parents tried to push her into the convent. And now, standing beside the man she loved, she felt the time had come to pursue her dream. One evening, after putting Sochima to bed, Ezine and Okechukwu sat together in their small but cozy living room. The warm glow of a lantern cast soft shadows on the walls, creating a peaceful atmosphere. Ezine looked at Okechukwu, her heart full of gratitude for everything he had done for her. "My love," she began softly, "do you remember my dream of studying law?" Okechukwu smiled, reaching out to hold her hand. "Of course I remember," he said gently. "I promised you that I would support you in achieving your dream, and I meant every word." Ezine's eyes sparkled with hope as she listened to her husband's words. "I want to start my education." "Okechukwu," she said with determination, I want to prove to myself and to everyone who doubted me that I am not a failure. I want to make you proud. Okechukwu squeezed her hand reassuringly. Ezinne, you have already made me proud, he said with a smile. But if studying law is what will make you happy, then I will do everything in my power to help you achieve it. True to his promise, Okechukwu began making arrangements for Ezinne to start her education. They faced many challenges, especially with balancing the responsibilities of raising Shoshima. But Ezinne was determined. She attended her classes with great focus and dedication, always keeping in mind the goal she had set for herself. She studied hard, often late into the night after Sochima had fallen asleep, determined to prove to herself and to her parents that she was not the failure they once believed her to be. Meanwhile, Ezinne's relationship with her parents had not healed. Since the day she left with Okechukwu, she had cut off ties with them. The pain and bitterness in her heart were too deep to forget. She couldn't bring herself to forgive them for all they had done to her. From forcing her to become a Reverend sister against her will, to harsh treatment they gave her when they found out about her pregnancy. The memories of their harsh words and the way they made her feel worthless still haunted her. She knew that holding on to anger wasn't good, but the wounds were still fresh, and she needed time to heal. So she focused on her studies and on building a better future for herself, Okechukwu and their son Sochima. She poured all her energy into her education, determined to succeed. Each day, as she went to her classes, Ezinne felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment. She was no longer the frightened girl who hid from the world. She was a strong, determined woman who knew what she wanted in life. And with Okechukwu by her side, she felt that anything was possible. Ezinne never relented in fulfilling her duties as a wife or mother and student. Despite the many responsibilities on her shoulders, she managed them all with grace and determination. Her days were filled with caring for Sochima, attending classes, and making sure that Okechukwu returned home to a warm meal and a loving home. It was a challenging routine, but Ezinne was dedicated to making sure her family was happy and that she succeeded in her studies. Okechukwu, on his part, was doing well at work. He was quickly gaining recognition for his hard work and dedication, and this brought stability and joy in their home. Their love continued to grow, and despite the hardship they faced, they remained each other's strongest supports. Meanwhile, back at Nanka, Mazibe and his wife Akudo had been feeling a deep sense of regret. The more they thought about their actions, the more they realized how poorly they had treated Ezinne, their daughter. They were confused about how to reconcile with their daughter, son-in-law, and their grandchild. They knew they had not been kind to Ezinne, especially considering the innocent child born in their presence, whom they had barely acknowledged. One weekend, Angela, Ezinne's elder sister, visited her parents. Mazibe and Akudo were excited to see her. They had missed her, as she had been busy with her studies. During their time together, they decided to open up to Angela about their feelings. Angela, Mazibe began hesitantly. We've been thinking a lot about your sister Ezinne. We miss her, and we know we haven't treated her well. Akudo nodded, her eyes filled with sadness. She hasn't reached out to us since she got married and moved out. We don't blame her, but we miss her, and we regret how we acted. Angela was moved by her parents' words. She could see that they had realized their mistakes and truly missed Ezinne. I will talk to her, Angela promised, determined to help bridge the gap between her parents and her sister. After spending the weekend with her parents, Angela returned to school. However, instead of going directly to the university, she decided to visit Ezinne. She had informed Ezinne a day before that she was coming, and Ezinne was thrilled to see her sister. When Angela arrived, they spent a lot of time catching up, laughing and sharing stories from their lives. Angela played with Sochima, who was now a lively and joyful baby, filling the house with his laughter. As the visit drew to a close, Angela knew it was time to discuss the reason for her visit. She gently brought up the topic of their parents. Ezinne, Angela began softly. I know you've been through a lot, and I understand how hurt you must be, but I think it's time you consider forgiving our parents. Ezinne's face grew serious, and she remained silent, listening to her sister. They've realized their mistakes, isn't it? Angela continued. They miss you so much and they regret how they treated you. They want to reconcile with you and be part of your life again. I think you should give them a chance to show you how sorry they are. Ezine listened to her sister's words with mixed feelings. The wounds her parents had inflicted were deep, and the thought of forgiving them was difficult. But Angela's words touched her heart, and she began to consider the possibility of reconciliation. After all, they were still her parents, and despite everything, a part of her missed them too. I'll think about it, Ezine finally said, her voice thoughtful. It's not easy, but I'll consider it. Angela smiled, relieved that her sister was open to the idea. She gave Ezine a warm hug before announcing her departure. Take care of yourself, Ezine, she said as she prepared to leave. And remember, you are not alone. We are all here for you, okay? Ezine watched as Angela left, her mind filled with thoughts about what her sister had said. She knew that the decision ahead wouldn't be easy, but perhaps it was time for her to heal the wounds of the past. After Angela left Ezine's home, she immediately sent a message to her parents. In the message, she urged them to visit Ezine, telling them that she had managed to soften her sister's heart. But Mazibe and Akudo were hesitant. They feared that Ezine would not allow them access to their house after all that had happened. The shame of their past actions weighed heavily on their minds, and the thought of facing their daughter made them anxious. Are you sure they would let us in? Akudo asked Angela when they spoke on the phone later that day. There is no harm in trying, Mama, Angela responded gently. She didn't outright reject the idea of reconciliation. Just go. Show her that you're truly sorry. It's the first step. Mazibe, who was listening in, finally agreed. All right, we will go, he said with a sigh. But we will tread carefully. We don't want to push her away even more. With their decision made, Mazibe and Akudo began preparing for the journey. They wanted to bring gifts and show Ezine that they were serious about making amends. They carefully selected foodstuffs, clothes, and other necessities they thought would be useful for their grandchild Sochima. Akudo spent hours cooking Ezine's favorite dishes, hoping that the gesture would touch her heart. As they packed the items, their minds were filled with thoughts of the upcoming visit. It had been so long since they had seen Ezine, and they couldn't help but wonder how much she had changed. Would she still look at them with the same love and respect she once had, or would there be nothing but hurt and anger in her eyes? Angela had given them the address to Ezine's house, so they knew exactly where to go. The next morning, with heavy hearts and hopeful minds, they loaded everything in the car and set off for the journey to reconcile with their daughter. Akudo was unusually quiet during the journey, lost in thought. She wondered what she would say to Ezine when they arrived. The memories of how they had treated her daughter during her pregnancy flashed through her mind, filling her with deep regret. She had always thought they were doing the right thing, but now she realized just how wrong they had been. Mazibe, on the other hand, focused on the road ahead. He too was struggling with his emotions, but he was determined to make things right. He had always been a proud man, but this situation had humbled him in a way he never expected. He prayed silently that Ezine would give him a chance to make up for their mistakes. The journey seemed longer than usual, with the weight of what they had ahead making every mile feel heavy. But they pressed on, knowing that this was a journey they had to take. As they approached Ezine's neighborhood, Akudo's heart began to race. She clutched the bag of foodstuff tightly, as if it could somehow convey the apology she was too nervous to speak. Mazibe parked the car outside Ezine's house and turned off the engine. For a moment, they both just sat there, neither one wanting to make the first move. Finally, Mazibe took a deep breath and opened the door. Let's go, he said quietly, helping Akudo out of the car. They approached the gate with a mix of hope and fear, their hearts pounding in unison. Would Ezine open the door to them, or would she turn them away? Mazibe and Akudo stood nervously at the entrance of the apartment building, crunching to the gift they had brought. A young man who seemed to be familiar with the place approached them, offering a polite smile. "Good afternoon, sir. Madam, how can I help you?" Mazibe cleared his throat and replied, "We are looking for Ezine. She lives here with her husband Okechukwu." The young man nodded and directed them to the right apartment. As they walked down the hallway, their hearts pounded in their chests. What would Ezine's reaction be? Would she welcome them or turn them away? When they reached the door, Mazibe hesitated for a moment before knocking. There was a brief silence, and then the door slowly opened. Ezine stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with surprise. She had not been expecting them at all. For what seemed like an eternity, they all stood there, staring at one another. The tension was thick in the air. Ezine's mind raced. Should she ask them to leave or invite them in? Her parents seemed just as unsure, not knowing whether to hug her or to speak first. The moment was so intense that no one noticed Okechukwu approaching. When he saw the scene before him, he quickly understood what was happening. With a warm smile, he stepped forward and cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Papa, Mama, welcome," Okechukwu said kindly, stepping aside to usher them in. "Please come in. Make yourself comfortable." Relieved by his presence, Mazibe and Akudo entered the apartment. They were careful with their words, not wanting to say anything that might upset Ezine. They exchanged pleasantly with the Okechukwu, who made them feel at ease. As they sat down in the sitting room, Sochima toddled in, his tiny feet making soft thuds on the floor. Mazibe and Akudo were taken aback by how much he had grown. He was no longer the newborn they had last seen. Akudo's heart ached to hold her grandchild, and she reached out to carry him. But Sochima, not recognizing her, pulled away and hid behind his mother's legs. Akudo's heart sank, and a tear welled up in her eyes. She realized how much time she had lost, time that could never be regained. Mazibe saw the pain in his wife's eyes and knew that it was time. He cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice heavy with emotion. "Ezine, my daughter," he began, his voice trembling. "We have come today to ask for your forgiveness. We know what we have done was so bad. We know we wronged you. We were harsh. We were unfair, and we were wrong. We were blinded by our pride, and in doing so, we hurt you deeply." Akudo, tears streaming down her face, added, "We thought we were doing what was best, but we now know how much we failed you. We cannot change the past, but we want to make things right. Please, my daughter, forgive us. We are so sorry for everything we put you through." Okechukwu, seeing the sincerity in their words, placed a comforting hand on Ezine's shoulder. "Ezine, they have come all the way to make amends. I know it's not easy, but forgiveness can bring healing. Let's give them a chance to show that they are truly sorry." Ezine listened to her husband and her parents, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. She remained silent, her face a mix of sadness and uncertainty. She didn't know what to say or how to feel. Ezine stood there, her eyes welling up with tears as she listened to her parents' apologies. For so long, she had held in the pain, the hurt, and the anger that had built up in her heart. Now, as she looked at her parents, she knew it was time to release everything she had kept buried inside. With a deep breath, Ezine finally spoke, her voice trembling with emotion. "Papa, Mama, do you know how much you hurt me?" she said, her eyes locked on theirs. "You almost ruined my life. You humiliated me, hated me, and tortured me. You made me feel like I was nothing, like I was a failure. I vowed that I would only see you again after I have finished my education and proven to you that I wasn't the failure you always said I was." Her parents' faces fell as they listened to their daughter's words. They could only see the deep pain in her eyes, the pain they had caused. They knew she was right and that they had been wrong. They had let their pride and expectations cloud their judgment, and in doing so, they had lost their daughter. But now, Ezine continued, her voice softening. "You are here, trying to make things right, and I see that you are aging. You are trying to emotionally blackmail me again, aren't you?" Before she could say more, Her parents quickly responded, their voices full of sincerity. No, Ezine, Mazibe said, his voice breaking. We are not trying to manipulate you. We are truly sorry for everything we did. We were wrong and we regret it every day. Please, my daughter, forgive us. We just want to make things right. Akudo, her voice choked with tears, added, we know we hurt you deeply and we can never take that back. But please, Ezine, give us a chance to show how much we love you. We are so sorry, my daughter. Please forgive us. Ezine could hear the genuine pain in their voices, and it touched at her heart. She had been holding on to her anger for so long, but now, in this moment, she realized that it was time to let go. They were her parents, and despite everything, she still loved them. Slowly, Ezine nodded, tears streaming down her face. I forgive you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I forgive you both. With that, Mazibe and Akudo rushed forward, wrapping their arms around their daughter in a tight embrace. Ezine hugged them back, and for the first time in a long time, they all let out the tears they had been holding in. It was an emotional moment, full of love, forgiveness, and healing. As they hugged, the tension that had filled the room dissipated, replaced by a warm sense of peace. The atmosphere became free again, and Ezine finally felt the weight on her heart lifting. She knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one where love and understanding would guide their relationship. After a few moments, Ezine gently pulled away and looked at her mother. Mama, would you like to carry Sochima? She asked softly. Akudo's eyes lit with joy as she nodded eagerly. Ezine knelt down beside her son, gently encouraging him to let his grandmother hold him. Though hesitant at first, Sochima eventually allowed his grandmother to lift him into her arms. As Akudo held her grandchild, a tear of happiness rolled down her cheek. She knew that she had been given a second chance, and she was determined not to waste it. She and Mazibe spent the rest of the day bonding with Sochima, playing with him and showering him with love. The next few days were filled with joy and laughter as Ezine's parents spent time with their daughter, son-in-law, and grandchild. They explored the town, shared meals, and created new memories together. It was as if all the pain and sorrow of the past had been washed away, leaving only love, happiness in its place. By the time Mazibe and Akudo left Onitsha, they had rekindled their relationship with Ezine and had formed a strong bond with Sochima. As they waved goodbye, they knew that they had been given a precious gift, the chance to be a family again. After the reconciliation between Ezine and her parents, peace and joy returned to their lives. The tension that had once clouded their relationship was gone, replaced by warmth and love. Akudo, who had once distanced herself from her daughter, now visited Ezine regularly. She wanted to make up for the lost time and create a strong bond with her grandson Chotima. When Akudo visited, the house was filled with laughter and chatter. She loved spending time with Sochima, playing with him, telling him stories, and teaching him little songs. Ezine was happy to see her mother so involved in her life again. It was as if the dark days were behind them and a new brighter chapter had begun. As the months passed, Ezine found herself approaching the final year of her law studies. This was a critical time in her education, and she knew it required her full attention and dedication. The final year of law school was known to be demanding, with exams, projects, and practical assignments. Ezine was determined to give it her all, to make her husband, her parents, and herself proud. Ezine's days became busier as she juggled her responsibilities as a wife, mother, and student. She spent long hours in the library, studying for her exams, preparing for her final year project, and participating in group discussions. Her commitment to her studies was unwavering, and she was determined to excel. Seeing how hard Ezine was working, Okechukwu stepped in to help wherever he could. He took on more responsibilities at home, caring for Sochima and handling household chores. He knew how important Ezine's education was to her, and he wanted to support her in every way possible. "Mommy, I'm here to help," Okechukwu would say with a smile as he took Sochima from Ezine's arms. You focus on your studies, we'll manage everything else. Akudo also did her part, frequently visiting to lend a hand. She would cook meals, clean the house, and take care of Sochima, giving Ezine the time and space she needed to study. The support from her family made a world of difference to Ezine, allowing her to concentrate fully on her academics. As Ezine approached her final exams, the atmosphere in the house was one of determination and teamwork. Everyone was up and doing, working together to ensure that Ezine would come out with flying colors. Even little Sochima seemed to understand that something important was happening. He would sit quietly with his toys while his mother studied, as if giving her the space she needed. Angela, who had always been close to Ezine, was delighted to see her family united again. She often visited her younger sister, bringing words of encouragement and helping out where she could. Angela knew how stressful the final year could be, and she wanted to do everything she could to ease the pressure on Ezine. Ezine, you're doing great, Angela would say during her visits. Just keep pushing. You're almost at the final line, and I know you will make us all proud. Ezine appreciated her sister's support. The bond between them had grown even stronger since the reconciliation, and Ezine was grateful to have Angela by her side during this challenging time. As time went on, Ezine's final exams drew closer. The pressure was intense, but Ezine remained focused and determined. She knew that all the hard work she had put in over the years was leading up to this moment. She wanted to prove to herself, to her parents, and to everyone who had doubted her that she was capable of achieving great things. With her family's support, Ezine felt confident that she could overcome any challenges that came her way. She knew that she was not alone, and that gave her the strength to keep going, even when things got tough. After completing her exams, Ezine felt a huge weight lift off her shoulders. The long night of studying, the endless hours in the library, and the pressure of balancing her duties at home with her academic responsibilities were finally behind her. Now, she could rest a bit and focus on preparing for her graduation, a moment she had dreamed of for so long. One quiet afternoon, Ezine sat by the window in her living room, gazing out at the peaceful surroundings. Sochima was playing nearby, his innocent laughter filling the room with warmth. As she watched him, her mind drifted back to the journey that had brought her to this point. Ezine began to reflect on her life, starting from her early days in primary school. She remembered the excitement of learning new things, the friendships she made, and the dreams she started to form as a little girl. Then came her secondary school years, where she excelled in her studies and discovered her passion for law. But those years were also marked by the challenges she faced at home. She thought about her parents' insistence that she become a Reverend sister. The memory of her time in the convent came rushing back. Days spent in prayers and solitude, the strict rules, and the overwhelming feeling that the life was not meant for her. She remembered how lost and confused she felt, trying to reconcile her own dreams with the path her parents wanted her to take. Ezine's thoughts then turned to the dark period when she found out she was pregnant. The humiliation, the harsh words from her parents, and the isolation she endured still stung. She had felt so alone during that time, unsure of what the future held. But through it all, she had clung to the hope that things would get better. Her eyes filled with tears as she thought about how far she had come since then. The hardships she faced only made her stronger. Her endurance, persistence, and determination had fueled her success today. She had refused to let anyone define her worth or limit her potential. But Ezine knew she couldn't have done it alone. She was always grateful to her husband Okechukwu, who had been her rock through it all. He loved her unconditionally and believed in her dreams. Even when she doubted herself, he never gave up on her, and for that, she would always be thankful. Okechukwu had been her biggest supporter, encouraging her to pursue her education and stand up for herself. With a smile, Ezine wiped away her tears and reached for her phone. It was time to share the news with her parents. She wanted them to be part of her graduation day, a day that would mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. When she called her parents and informed them about her upcoming graduation, she could hear the excitement in their voices. Mazibe and Akudo were overjoyed to hear that their daughter had completed her studies. They promised to be there for the event, eager to celebrate Ezine's achievement. In the days that followed, Mazibe and Akudo made preparations for the graduation ceremony. They bought new clothes, wanting to look their best for their daughter's big day. As they prepared, their hearts were filled with joy and pride. They were no longer ashamed of Ezine as they had once been. Instead, they were proud of her resilience and the strong, determined woman she had become. The long-awaited graduation day finally arrived. The sun was shining brightly in the sky, casting a warm glow over everything. Ezine, dressed radiantly in her academic gown, stood in front of a mirror in her room, adjusting her cap. Her heart was pounding with excitement and joy. Today was the day she had been working so hard for, and it was finally here. Okechukwu stood beside her, his eyes filled with pride. He had been by her side every step of the way, supporting her through all the challenges. "You look absolutely stunning," he said with a smile, taking her hand. Ezine blushed and smiled back at him. "Thank you, my love," she replied. "I couldn't have done it without you." With Sochima in tow, the small family made their way to the school convocation area. The air was filled with excitement as graduates and their families gathered for the ceremony. Ezine could hardly contain her happiness as she walked towards the venue, her heart swelling with pride. Today was not just a celebration of her academic success, it was a celebration of everything she had overcome to get here. As they arrived at the convocation arena, Ezine turned and saw her family standing by her side. Mazibe and Akudo were there, dressed in their finest clothes, their faces beaming with pride. Angela was also present, smiling widely as she waved at her sister. The sight of her family together filled Ezine's heart with warmth. The ceremony began, and the convocation hall buzzed with excitement. Ezine sat with her fellow graduates, listening to the speeches and waiting eagerly for her name to be called. Finally, the moment came. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall. "Ezine Okechukwu." Ezine's heart skipped a beat as she heard her name. She stood up, her legs feeling a bit shaky from the excitement, and made her way to the stage. As she climbed the stage, she could feel the eyes of everyone in the hall on her. When she reached the stage, the announcer continued, "Ezine Okechukwu, who has not only earned her degree, but also receives the award of the best student." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Ezine couldn't believe what she had heard. Tears of joy welled up in her eyes as she accepted her certificate and the award. The hall erupted in applause, and Ezine looked out into the crowd to see Okechukwu clapping in happiness, a huge smile on his face. Mazibe and Akudo were clapping too, their faces glowing with pride. Even little Sochima, sitting on his father's lap, was giggling and clapping his tiny hands, as if he understood the significance of the moment. Ezine wiped away her tears as she stood on the stage, holding her certificate and award. This was the culmination of all her hard work, her struggles, and her determination. She had done it. She had proven to herself and to everyone that she was not a failure. As she stepped down from the stage, her family rushed to meet her. Okechukwu was the first to reach her, wrapping her in a warm embrace. "I'm so proud of you, Ezine," he whispered in her ear. "Thank you, my love," she whispered back, her voice choked with emotion. Mazibe and Akudo were next, their eyes filled with tears of joy. "You have made us proud, my daughter," Mazibe said, his voice trembling with emotion. "We are so sorry for everything," Akudo added, her voice soft and sincere. Ezine smiled through her tears. "Thank you, Papa, Mama," she said, her heart full of love and forgiveness. "I couldn't have done it without your prayers and support." Angela joined in the group hug, her own eyes misty with tears. "You did it, Ezine. You are officially a lawyer now," she exclaimed, her voice filled with pride. "Now, our family has both a doctor and a lawyer." They all laughed together, the sound of their joy filling the air. The pain and the struggles of the past were now behind them, replaced by the happiness of this moment. They spent the rest of the day celebrating, capturing the happy moments with photos and videos. Ezine knew that this was just the beginning. There were still many challenges ahead, but with her family by her side and the love of her husband and son, she knew she could face anything that came her way. Ezine's journey continued as she took another significant step in her life, attending law school. It was a challenging period, but Ezine was determined to succeed. She approached her studies with the same determination and focus that had carried her through her previous academic journey. The environment at law school was intense, but Ezine thrived under the pressure. She studied hard, participated actively in classes, and always sought to improve her understanding of the law. As time went on, Ezine's hard work paid off. She passed her exams with flying colors and was finally called to the bar. Okechukwu and her entire family. The ceremony was grand, with Ezine dressed in her lawyer's robe, looking every bit the accomplished professional she had become. Her parents, Okechukwu, Sochima, and Angela, were there to witness the moment, their hearts bursting with pride. After the call to bar, Ezine knew it was time to put all she had learned into practice. She decided to start her career in a well-known law chamber where she could gain experience and make a name for herself. The chamber was busy and handled many important cases, and Ezine was eager to prove herself. Ezine worked diligently in the law chamber, learning the ropes and gaining valuable experiences. She observed seasoned lawyers in actions, soaking up every bit of knowledge she could. It wasn't long before she was given her first case to handle. It was a small case, but for Ezine, it was an opportunity to showcase her skills and intelligence. Ezine prepared thoroughly for the case. She went through all the necessary documents, researched extensively, and practiced her arguments. She was determined to win, not just for herself, but for her client who was counting on her. The day of the court hearing finally arrived. Ezine stood in the courtroom, her heart pounding with nervous excitement. She presented her case with confidence, doing her best to defend her client. But despite all her efforts, the case didn't go as she had hoped. The opposing lawyer was more experienced and managed to sway the judge's decision. In the end, Ezine lost the case. Ezine was heartbroken. She had poured her heart and soul into the case, and losing was a heavy blow. She felt like she had let everyone down, her clients, her colleagues, and most of all herself. The disappointment weighed heavily on her as she returned home that evening. Okechukwu noticed the sadness in Ezine's eyes as soon as she walked through the door. He gently took her hand and led her to the sofa. "Tell me what happened," he said softly, his voice full of concern. Ezine sighed deeply and told him about the case and how she had lost. Tears welled up in her eyes as she spoke. "I wanted to win so badly, Okechukwu. I feel like I failed." Okechukwu wrapped his arms around her and held her close. "You didn't fail, Ezine," he said reassuringly. "This was your first case, and you did your best. That's what matters. There will always be other cases, and you will have many more opportunities to succeed." Ezine looked up at him, her eyes still glistening with tears. "But I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to show that I'm a good lawyer." "You are a good lawyer," Okechukwu said firmly. "One case doesn't define your entire career. What's important is that you learn from the experience and keep moving forward. You will do even better next time. I'm sure of it." Ezine felt a warm sense of comfort from Okechukwu's words. She knew he was right. This was just the beginning of her career, and she couldn't let one setback discourage her. She wiped away her tears and nodded. "Thank you," she whispered, feeling a bit more hopeful. Her family also rallied around her, offering words of encouragement and support. Mazibe and Akudo reminded her of all she had already achieved and how proud they were of her. Angela, who had always been Ezine's biggest cheerleader, assured her that she would have many more chances to shine. With her family's support, Ezine's spirit began to lift. She realized that losing one case didn't mean she was a failure. It was just part of the learning process, and she was determined to keep improving. Ezine went back to work with renewed determination, studying her mistakes from the previous case and working ways to improve. She knew that another case would come her way very soon, and when it did, she would be ready. She would continue to work hard, learn and grow, just as she had always done. Ezine was more determined than ever to prove herself, not only to others, but to herself as well. As time went on, Ezine was determined not to let her previous loss define her career. She continued working hard, gaining more experiences, and learning from every opportunity. Her dedication and resilience paid off when she was assigned another case. This time, it was a sensitive and important case involving a young woman who had been a victim of rape. Ezine knew the weight of the case and how much it meant to the victim. She remembered her own struggles and the pain she had endured. She was determined to seek justice for the young woman. Ezine threw herself into the case, working late into the night, gathering evidence and preparing her arguments. She knew she couldn't afford to lose, not for herself, but for the victim who desperately needed someone to stand up for her. The day of the trial came, and Ezine was ready. She stood confidently in the courtroom, presenting her case with all the passion and commitment she could muster. She spoke with such clarity and conviction that everyone in the courtroom was moved. Ezine's arguments were strong, and she was able to expose the truth, leaving no room for doubt. When the verdict was announced, Ezine won the case. The victim was finally given the justice she deserved, and Ezine felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had made a difference in someone's life, and that victory meant the world to her. It wasn't just about winning in a case, it was about standing up for who was right and giving a voice to those who needed it the most. Ezine's success in the case quickly spread. People began to notice her work, and she started receiving more cases, each one more challenging than the last. Her name became known, and she gained a reputation for being a passionate and dedicated lawyer who truly cared about her clients. But despite her growing fame and success, Ezine never lost sight of what was important to her. Ezine knew that her family was her foundation, and she made sure to balance her career with her responsibilities as a wife and mother. Okechukwu continued to be her greatest support, always encouraging her and helping her in any way he could. Together, they made sure that their home was filled with love and happiness, and that Sochima always felt cherished and cared for. Mazibe and Akudo were also filled with pride as they watched their daughters rise to success. They were amazed by how far Ezine had come, and they couldn't help but feel a deep sense of regret for how they had treated her in the past. Mazibe, in particular, often thought about how he had tried to force Ezine into becoming a Reverend sister, believing that it was the right path for her. But now, seeing how happy and successful she was, he realized that he had been wrong. Mazibe made it a point to tell others about the importance of allowing children to follow their own dreams. Whenever he had the chance, he would share Ezine's stories as a lesson to other parents, urging them to support their children's choices and never force them into a path they didn't want to take. He vowed never to make that mistakes again and to always encourage others to do the same. As the years went by, peace continued to reign in their family. The bond between Ezine and her parents grew stronger, and they were all happy to be a part of each other's lives. Mazibe and Akudo were often referred to as Mama, Doctor, and Papa Lawyer by the people in their village, and they couldn't have been more proud of their daughter's achievements. Ezine's story was one of perseverance, love, and the power of following one's dreams. She had faced many challenges, but she never gave up. With the support of her husband, family, and her own determination, she was able to overcome every obstacle and achieve great success. In the end, Ezine proved that no matter what difficulties life throws at you, with hard work, courage, and the support of loved ones, anything is possible. She had found her purpose, and she was living a life filled with happiness, love, and fulfillment. And that, for Ezine, was the greatest success of all. And with that, my dear friends, our story comes to a close. But remember, the magic of storytelling lives on, waiting to whisk us away on new adventures, where the wonders of imagination know no bounds. Goodbye for now, and may your dreams be filled with joy, wonder, and endless possibility. Thank you so much for watching. Please kindly comment, like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting stories.